Welcome everyone to this Facilitator interview series. Today we have Karen Gimnig and François Knuchel who are going to lead us through what they've learned, what worked great, what they'd like to see improvements with. This is just an honest conversation from a facilitator's perspective. All these questions will focus not necessarily on the technology, but specifically on the design decisions they made as facilitators. I'll turn it over to François and Karen. Welcome.
Thank you, Lucas. Okay, so I'm François Knuchel, based in London, and my colleague here is Karen. Karen, do you just want to briefly?
Yeah, I'm based in Northwest Washington State, and I facilitate and organize and do some instruction around collaborative spaces and groups that are trying to do things cooperatively together. So open space is one of many tools, but definitely a favorite.
And likewise for myself, is one of many tools, although also probably the most cherished one. So the conference, or yeah, it was called a conference. The conference we ran was for the U.S. National Workforce Registry Alliance, which was an alliance of different workforce registries in the different states in the United States, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background first before we go into the Kiko chat part and how this came about. So the only way that they communicate with each other in a massive scale, I'm not talking about one-to-one, has been through their conferences. So they've always had a conference every year, and on average about 150 people, so there's about 2 or 3 per state, came to these conferences. And of course, with COVID-19, that all changed because suddenly they found themselves not being able to run the conference, and the conference is the main highlight of the alliance. Remember, the alliance is simply an alliance of different registries. They all work for the individual separate registries. They don't work for the alliance per se. And so they had already, but so they had debated whether to cancel it or to do something. They decided to try something, but had gone in a slightly, what I would call a slightly wrong route, in the sense that they had already contracted with a more traditional type of event provider to run a sort of a more conventional type of conference. So I'll just show you briefly how they were going to do that online. I'll just share my screen. There we are. And just a second. Can you all see that?
Very good.
Right. So this was basically they were going to supposedly come into the main area and online on screen, and this is what it looked like. But what I'm actually showing you is not what I saw when they first presented it to me. This is actually the one they actually designed for the final version. So you're actually seeing the one they used. But when I first came in many months ago, this hadn't been designed yet. So I saw something different, but the idea is simply that if you wanted to go to there were various aspects. So if you wanted to go to the information desk or the exhibition hall or the auditorium, can you see my cursor moving?
I'm afraid I can't see the cursor.
Oh, right. Okay. Let me see. Spotlight. Right, can you see something?
Now we see it, yes.
All right, okay. So if they wanted to go to the auditorium, or if they wanted to go to the exhibition hall or the lounge, they would just click on that area. And the auditorium, where the presentations were given, this was a lounge where supposedly you could meet, but the way that worked is you clicked on the chat, and then it would take you to a screen which had just a box standard list of people who were there, and you could just click on a person and start a chat. So it looked very fancy on the surface, but the background was very simplistic and yeah, uninteresting. There was an exhibition hall too, in which even we had an exhibit, but essentially what it was is it was a visual with some links to different places, and you can see it says open space here. So if you clicked on here, that would take you straight to the Kiko chat, to the Kiko chat room. So they showed me this. I'm going to unshare. Sorry. They showed me this. This was back in June, and said, okay, so this is what we're doing. But we're not sure how we can get more engagement, and this is why we were brought in, and say the complaint even before COVID was that there wasn't enough engagement, and people wanting to have more ability to engage with each other. And they said, basically said, okay, this is the platform we're doing. How can we get more engagement? And so I looked at it and I wrote back a report and said, well, this is not set up for, there's no way that this is set up for engagement, because it's all one-way street. It's, Lucas, you've seen it before, and you call it just a broadcasting. It's all about broadcasting. So I said, okay, I can't do anything with this. And at which point I found out that they had already paid and contracted for so they couldn't get out of it, even though they read my analysis and thought, oh, I was right, but they couldn't get out of it anyway. So it was. The question was, okay, do I run an open space event in parallel to a conventional event? And in a normal situation, I would never do it, because having a hybrid of the two has never really properly worked. But this was a slightly different situation. In one, it was online, and so there was no evidence to say that it doesn't work. So in a way, I couldn't say that. And secondly, they did agree not to run the keynote speakers and the presenter at the same time of the open space. So we run them separately. So the schedule that we ran, they had 4 days, but we had 3 days of open space. The first day was just a few keynote speakers that gave their presentations. And on the second day, there would just be one keynote speaker. And then in the afternoon was devoted to open space for 3.5 hours. They didn't want to make it longer than 3.5 hours, because they would worry that people would, they'd never experienced what open space was, so they didn't know. I mean, so that was basically the framework we were operating in. And so we had sort of the issue. We had a bit of competition from the VFairs, in the sense that there was this lounge which had a chat facility, and as it turned out, a lot of people, because the VFairs was the starting point, they never got out of VFairs, and so they never came into the open space cafe, or they did, but they came in at the wrong time when nobody was there. So that was one issue that, in retrospect, we learned.
Is that because when they look at Open Space Cafe, they just see it like they're walking into a movie theater, but they can't tell if it's open or closed at that time?
Exactly. And even though it was on the schedule, it was obvious that people were not looking at the schedule, because I know that we had something like 50 people who went into the because I was observing into the Kiko chat, and I could see it in the comments saying, well, where is it? But there's nobody here. so I where I could, I text, I sent back a message saying it only starts tomorrow at so and so time, but some of them never showed up again.
Interesting. Was it your idea to have open space as part of this whole experience, or did the client already want open space?
Well, no, before I got involved, they didn't know anything about open space. So this, in that sense, we were an add-on to deal with the problem of engagement. How do we get, so they had they had it all more or less set up, more or less everything figured, but then they wanted to know, how can we get engagement? And my suggestion to them was, okay, you can't do it with the platform you're on. The only way you can do it is have a separate platform, which is KikoChat, and we can and do it in open space. And they read. I gave them stuff. I presented a little bit. I showed them KikoChat. I showed the open space and so on, and they fell in love with it. They definitely liked it, but they couldn't. And they said, actually, I mean, the Kimberly, the key person, said, well, if she could, she'd cancel what they've got and just move across. But that was already not possible, and there were too many other, and they'd already got keynote speakers aligned and so on. So it wasn't possible. So we had to sort of work with this, with that situation. Is the basics, and Karen will show you the KikoChat site in a second, but so I just wanted to say, so we had 400. There were 400. So the other discussion was, at first they said, well, offline we usually had 150 people, so maybe we'll get 50 people, or online maybe we get 50 people, or 100 at the most. And I said, well, that's not my experience. My experience is actually online. There are more people, not less, not fewer people. And so I said it could be anything from 250 to 500. And they didn't believe me, of course. And so they planned for 100 and 150 and so on. And of course, when the tickets start selling, within I think 2 days, they'd already sold 150 tickets. And so they realized, and that's true. And of course, they learned from it, because doing online, there's so many more people who wouldn't be able to do it because there was a travel and the cost and so on, which is possible to do on. But unfortunately, that didn't actually translate into the KikoChat part, because of partly because they didn't know what open space was. So they weren't, that wasn't in itself an attractor. They were already on a different, well, they were actually on 2 different platforms. I didn't mention there was another platform that was like a bit of a registration platform, like Event. I thought it was simply going to be an alternative Eventbrite, but actually it's a little bit more than that, because it also had the schedule and all the information, and it also had a chat feature and a conversation feature, and that itself also. And so what actually happened is that there's a whole range of chats, text chats, that did take place, but they didn't take place in KikoChat. So there's some lessons to be learned there. Because we had 400, there are 400 people registered in the KikoChat in the back office, but only about 70 or 80 actually came and participate in open space. And that was the big mystery. Why didn't, what happened to the other 300 or so? But in retrospect, the lessons to be learned. And if you've got competing technologies, and people are not, these were not people who are familiar with open space. They just didn't. They didn't turn up, or they turned up at the wrong time, or because there are at least 150 who actually signed, logged in, and because we can see that because it was part of a circle, so I can see that on the circle side. So people did actually come at some point, but not at the right time. So maybe Karen, maybe any questions so far?
These are great lessons learned.
So should I share my screen and kind of walk you through how we set up our KikoChat?
Yes, please.
I say how we set it up. François set up our KikoChat, and I came in and facilitated. So it's a pretty straightforward setup. We knew we were orienting folks who were navigating lots of sort of complexity of online, and new to open space as well. So we wanted to decrease any sort of tech challenges for them. So this welcome introduction page was pretty extensive on the including a help desk kind of place where they could go and get tech support, although it wasn't used very much. This was a group that didn't need that. And then I think the other interesting piece is sort of how we set up the agenda. And I will say this was set up initially, and then we kept converting it. One thing that we did that I then applied to another conference I did later, another event, was we set up the rooms such that any given session any given room was not shared between multiple time slots. So that if it wasn't over at the named time slot ending, this is one of the advantages of online, is that there's no reason that you have to leave room 1 because a new session's coming in. We just put all of the time slot, the second time slot sessions in different rooms, because you can have essentially infinite rooms. And then we also, you can sort of see, so this is just a Google sheet that's set up and it got filled in. So you can see that you can see these like teeny tiny little rows. Well, that's because there are other rooms set up available there should we have needed them, but we kept them, they're just reduced. We just made those rows as small as we could make them on the Google sheet, so they become invisible. And so while there was space remaining, we kept those small. And if we'd gotten way more participation, which could have happened for us, right? We had 400 people registered, we're looking at 50. We could have simply expanded those rows in the Google Sheet, and suddenly we've got more rooms available to fill in. So those were 2 things that we sort of did in the setup to accommodate flexibility, both in times of sessions. And in our case, we found that, this looks like a pretty full day, and this was the 3rd of the 3 days in the first session. We found that as the days went on, the sessions got less and less populated. And so it wasn't unusual for a session to just keep going because there was a rich and live conversation happening and nothing very, not very many options of, convened for the next time slot. So nothing really pushing people to end. And having the room set up in that way facilitated that flexibility. And then for the room setups themselves, really simple, just a note sheet. We had originally set them up with a note sheet for each day, so that, the same rooms were used day 1, day 2, day 3. And so we have the note sheets for the different days, but really simple format, and people could just fill in what they wanted to say. Again, their Google Docs. So pretty straightforward. So that's essentially how we set up KikoChat. We set up some other rooms. We had the gardens were set up and available, and some other sort of fun things. Nobody used them. And that may have been because it was small. That may have been because it was new technology. But really it was pretty much the more conventional open space, just to the online format that people engaged in, and were really happy. We only had maybe 1/8 of the people who could have come, or a quarter, I don't know what the numbers were, but we had a pretty small percentage of the folks that might have come actually show up, but a really high percentage of people who showed up that were happy. So any other questions?
Can you scroll down again so I can see the other rooms, even though they weren't used?
What
So
was
I'm
your,
wondering
sorry,
about
after you, Cecilia. Yes.
serendipity.
So serendipity reminds me of my childhood video games before the tech was so good. And we'll see if this loads. Very basic. You can see this, and it knows I've been there before. So I had plugged in, but I select my character. Why is it not letting me in? Well, let me select a different one.
You have to scroll down on the other one.
There you go.
You're on Zoom at the moment, so it might
Oh,
not.
because I'm on Zoom and not totally in it. Is that, oh.
And allow at the top. You got it.
That do it. Thank you.
If you move there you go.
There we go. So I could see, so you have to enter with the keyboard. So it's fairly simple. So anyhow, I can travel around, and if others were in here, I could run into them. And when I got close to them, I could talk to them. So you can wander around in this very...
Is it like an extra thing, or something that is available?
It is available and free. This is a tool called Work Adventure, and I can always help you make this happen. There's just some links that you pop into your event, and it's the same experience as Karen. And I think that if your audience is an audience that kind of would like video games, they'll have a lot of fun with this. And I think it's
and then
always...
the other one was photo booth.
Mhm.
I didn't actually play with this one together. Francois, do you want to talk through what this one was?
Yeah, it's basically you just take a screenshot of the Zoom and then put it in a frame. Just the examples. I don't know if you scroll down if there's some actual examples. I thought there were, but maybe I took them
I
off.
wonder if I could.
But yeah, you just take yeah, so to speak, and then resize it.
Yeah, it's you can see it's not fitting the way we would want, but anyway.
That's fun. So
normally you would have a gallery view rather than a screen share view. So
right.
Yeah.
Great idea for making it more social and fun, and the concept of everyone is building something together. They're building these pictures, they're also building the conversations together. And I think the more of this oneness you create, the more power the results of the conversations can have after.
Yeah, and I would imagine those would have been more likely to be used, if you had 12-hour open space events. 3.5 in a day, people weren't looking for those extra playful things. They were just coming for the sessions.
In the main room, can you show us some other tabs that you had up there? I saw one about open space principles. And one other question, when you're introducing open space in person versus online, did it feel different? Was there anything surprising about how you introduced open space to people who are not familiar with it?
There was, and I'm going to stop sharing so that Francois actually has keyed up a video of the way that I introduced it.
So Karen did a beautiful job, because we had the issue that people were new to KikoChat, but they were also new to open space. And so, and at the same time, you don't want to spend 2 hours explaining how it all works and so on. You want to keep it as short as possible. And she did a beautiful job of not explaining one after the other, first KikoChat and then the open space principle, but blending the two together. So I'm just going to show you a video of her opening, a part of the opening circle, so you get a gist of what she did.
While you're setting that up, I'll say one other thing that I did very intentionally. I felt like with this group that was new to open space, that getting them to feel sort of connected was really important, and that the sort of disembodiment that I think happens, it happens on Zoom in general, but it's worse when you share your screen because the speaker picture gets tiny. And I really didn't want to do that because I felt like how much they trusted me as a facilitator holding the space was really going to impact how freely they engaged in that space. I think that sort of personal connection turns out to matter. So rather than using a screen share, I used the virtual backgrounds, and you can see that just in this Zoom call, I'm running through them. So I used the virtual backgrounds as a slideshow on Zoom so that I could stay in speaker view and not have to go to screen share. So that's one element. And then the other element was, as Francois said, integrating the principles with the KikoChat. So I'll stop talking and let you.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
I'll show you a couple of minutes of that.
You're having an open space session.
Can you hear
how that goes? And so don't feel like you have to be in a particular place or with a particular person or at a particular time.
Can you hear the volume?
It's a little light, but we can hear it. It's a little light.
On the room that you want to go to. And once we get the agenda generated, the topics will also be printed in those boxes with the rooms.
It's good.
So you click on whichever room you want to go to. That will take you to this KikoChat screen for that room. You will still need to click on join video for the particular room that you want to be in. I'll say more about that in a minute. But you are able to navigate there. There are the rooms, which will have some topics assigned to them. And then there are the gardens, which are kind of more hangout places. So you're welcome to go to any of those places at any time. So principle number 4, whatever happens is the only thing that could have. We find that the more that we can relax from expectations and follow that passion meter that I talked about, follow that engagement. If you are excited, engaged, and learning, that's the only thing that counts. whatever happens is the only thing that could have. And we think you likely will be surprised at just how rich that is. We do like to keep a note of what happened because you won't be able to be in all the rooms at once. And so one of the things that this Kiko chat format does, and feel free to click on room 1 or room 2 now, that won't take you out of the Zoom room. You can just click on room 1, and what you'll see there is the blank notes sheet. And what we'll ask is when you're in a session, particularly if you're convening, but if you can just make sure that someone is recording the notes, or even better, someone's. The great thing about Google Docs is that it's collaborative note-taking. So when you get to a session, make sure you're in that note sheet. Each note sheet has session spaces for the 3 different time slots of sessions that we'll have today. So if you're in the second time slot today, that would be time slot B. You want to scroll down till you get there. You can also use the, there's a little table of contents icon to the left of the note sheet that you can use to navigate if you prefer. But we do encourage you to take those notes. They will be available to everyone after the conference. And so if you can keep a record in that way of what happened, it's wonderful. And whatever that is the only thing that could have. And we celebrate that. So that's principle 4. Principle 5, when it's over, it's over. So if you have a really lovely, engaged conversation for 10 minutes and you find you're done, okay. Sessions are scheduled at 40 minutes long, but they don't have to take 40 minutes. So when it's over, it can be over. And there's no need to fill the time. So just sort of get a little free from that expectation. When it's over, I recommend that you actually use the leave button in the Zoom room when you're ready to leave that video room. It'll prompt you to leave the meeting, that standard Zoom language. It does not mean that you're leaving Kiko chat. It just means you're leaving that video gathering space, sort of like walking out the door of a conference room into the rest of the conference. And then you can use your Kiko chat screen to navigate to the room you'd like to be in, and then the join video link there. So when it's over, whether that's at the end of a 40-minute session or sometime sooner, or perhaps sometimes later, go ahead and use the leave meeting button to get to another room. So that's the 5 principles. And then this is maybe the most important piece, and the one that's most foreign to us, is the law of 2 feet. And the law of 2 feet says, if you are not learning or contributing to the learning of someone else, it is our expectation, it is necessary for you to use your 2 feet to leave that room and go to a place where you are learning, where you are engaged, where you are passionate, or you are contributing to the learning of someone else. And because we're online, we're converting the law of 2 feet and calling it the law of 2 clicks to get you to another room where you can be engaged. And so we want to encourage you to do that at any time and not necessarily wait for the end of the session. It is not considered impolite in the realm of open space to leave while someone's speaking. Go to the place where you are engaged and excited. We have a couple of roles that we like to talk about. So some people find that they get excited for about 2 minutes in each thing, and they go from one room to another room to another room, and we call them bumblebees, because that's actually a really valuable service that those folks do for the rest of the group, which is that they take a little bit of all the different things and they carry it from room to room to room, just like little pollinators. So we want to celebrate that. Folks who move around a lot, feel free to do that. You're the bumblebees and you carry a lot of information from group to group and create a sort of cohesiveness. The other role that we find is the opposite. It's the people who don't get engaged in any session at all at the moment, and they just sort of hang out, maybe in the gardens, maybe in the main room, wherever they are. And we call them butterflies, because we find what happens with those folks is that other folks find them and see their beautiful colors, and suddenly a session that wasn't planned or named begins to happen in that space, and the butterflies sort of anchor those sessions happening randomly throughout the day. So feel free to be a bumblebee or a butterfly, or to just be a person who likes to find one session and join that session. So that is the overall overview of how open space technology works. And I want to pause just for a second in case anyone has questions. Feel free to, probably the best thing is to pop a question in the chat.
I've still got the video running at the back somewhere.
That was great, Karen.
Right. It's beautiful, isn't it? And yes, and if you want to watch the whole thing, I can put a link for where you can see the whole thing. The whole thing took about 17 minutes. So it took 17 minutes from the start to explaining KikoChat and the principles, and to get to where they started putting the agenda together. So that was, I thought, quite brilliant.
And I will say one of the really clever things that François did, because of course, not everybody showed up for the opening, as will happen. So François videotaped that and very quickly processed it and put it available. So you, on that main screen, one of the links that Lucas had been asking about was a link to that particular video. So people who came later and wanted to take their 17 minutes to get oriented could get that same orientation.
So Karen, did you want to briefly show what you learned from this and how you took that?
Yeah, if folks are interested. So I then did the next event, which was with the Co-Housing Association, and essentially copied what François had built for what we did. So if you're interested, I can just take a minute and share my screen and kind of show you.
That'd be
how
great.
I
Thank you, Karen.
adapted. So very, very similar. You're seeing the welcome page. This again was a group of people who were not familiar with open space, but it was an event that was exclusively open space. It was conceived that way from the beginning. So we were in a very similar kind of orienting people to open space. I will also say this was a group who was much more technically challenged than the National Registries group. The co-housing world has a much higher percentage of older retired folks, and not to make any generalizations, but there is a trend that those folks are more likely to fall in the category of needing tech help. So we did find that our primary room, which we called the common house because that's language that is co-housing language, we spent a lot of time, our staff, in the common house room during sessions helping people deal with the technology. Not because of any flaws in the technology, but just people weren't familiar. But we did set up the same sort of welcome and introduction with the schedule navigation. And we added a feedback form linked right there so people could go to a Google feedback form right away. The agenda, you'll notice, is very similar. One thing that François figured out that I think was genius was the color coding. And you'll notice there's this row of hyphens here. That translates. So if you just select and copy into the room assignment KikoChat interface, those dashes remain. So you get that. We also have this time slot, and these row or columns are locked in the spreadsheet so that those don't accidentally get edited. But we have the time slots built in with the hyphens there as well. And you'll see, again, we have this sort of accordioning. So the rooms 8, 9, and 10 do exist there. They're just minimized because we didn't need them, but they were there ready to open up at any point that we might. But I deliberately did groups of 10 so that the room numbers themselves actually indicated which time slot you were in. So time slot 1 was rooms 1 through 10. We didn't need all 10, but they were there. And then time slot 2 began with room 11. So whether you expanded or not, the sessions, as you sort of scrolled through, these are the ones we did an accordion out, so they weren't available. But then if you're looking at what's available room 2, they're all grouped together, whether we had expanded them or not. They were all consecutive. So that's really the main things that we changed. And then another fun thing, one of our organizing team members is someone who has a lot of pictures of co-housing that he likes to share. So he used the feature to adapt the photo to relevant photos of co-housing. And it was all different spaces that exist in shared co-housing. There's the whole common house concept, but he was very clever and had all the various ones that might be, including, I think there's a utility room on there, like all kinds of things. And I think people had a good time seeing that. I would say it depends on how much sort of organizational time is available. I don't know as a staff organizer that I would have taken the time. In fact, I'm quite certain I would not have taken the time to do that to the extent that he did, but we had an eager volunteer who was delighted to do it, and I think people did enjoy it. So yeah, any questions about that sort of next adaptation?
Very cool to see how you did the dashes and the locked columns in Google spreadsheets. I didn't even know you could lock columns in Google spreadsheets, so I'm very thankful to learn that. And I think since you've done your event, we now have the ability to hide rooms on the left-hand side in Kiko. So if you end up not using 7, 8, 9, and 10, then they can be hidden, and that is going to make your event even more compact. Yet again, maybe it's good to have the extra space because maybe people walk into it, be butterflies, have conversations that were unplanned. So very well done. Any questions for Karen?
I don't have
No,
any. I'm sorry, I don't have any questions. Just want to say thank you for sharing. I love just a lot of human touches that's out there, the interaction, the fun, the pictures, to bring in those senses, to have the places. So thank you for those details.
Thank you. So we did actually hide a lot of those rooms because we had 400. We were expecting 400. We actually had something like 40 rooms, but very quickly I hid most of them using that facility. As you saw, you only saw 10 actually when you were looking at the thing. So maybe I just sort of wanted to bring it to some kind of conclusion by saying what I've learned. For first of all, although we on our side we were a bit disappointed we didn't have the 400 people that we were expecting that were actually registered. The people who did show up, the 70 who did show up, they came regularly every day for the 3 days, and they were fully engaged. And for them it was beautiful, it was wonderful. I mean, the feedback we got was just enormously, and it was a major hit basically. And we were all just a little disappointed not everybody was able to share and be part of that, and that's a big question mark as to what we would do differently so that we don't get that sort of effect of some people being somewhere else, and because for the ones who came, it was a huge success, a real engagement. The feedback was wonderful, and of course, it doesn't stop there. People are going to carry on, possibly rather than doing some longer open stage sessions, maybe run them, because that's something else also we've learned is different in online. It's because people don't have to physically come to a place. It's easy. You can maybe run them instead of 3 days session. You could run a 1 day session, but every quarter instead of once a year or something like that. So you can work with different sort of time configurations, which would be more difficult in an offline space. Obviously, I've mentioned about the need to be careful about all those competing platforms, which but of course the other thing I've learned, because I subsequently after this conference I also run another conference, or co-run. I was the supporter for another conference which was actually run by Martin, who was also a part of our who was a tech support in this particular conference here, and he ran a 2-week conference. That was more of a traditional conference with presentations. So he had 4 or 5 different sort of rooms, and they just ran presentations, but it was all done on KikoChat, and each room was a presentation room basically, but using a regular Zoom. They weren't because they wanted, and the reason they did that because they wanted to have presentation, but they still want to have that interaction, the ability to interact. So they didn't want the seminar, the webinar type of Zoom. And that worked beautifully. That was also a huge success. And what I've really learned now, I mean, I wouldn't, when I first started with this project, I wouldn't have been able to do so. But what I've really feel quite confident having done it now is that we could have done the whole conference. We could have done the presentation bits and the open space bit, and we could have all done it on KikoChat, including the exhibition, because I've subsequently also visited one of Lucas's exhibitions that he's done on KikoChat. So and it's just beautiful how you can just embed things within the room. So I've got I've created a showcase where I've embedded the exhibitions within one room of KikoChat. So it's rooms within rooms kind of thing. And as long as you make sure you turn off the videos, you can actually, they work, you can get video, just like the gardens, you can get the gardens to be embedded within one room. And it's beautiful. So there's an enormous amount of complexity you can build in, but of course the caution is you start off as simple as possible to get people to get comfortable, and then you can build up and you can add things in preparation as the conference develops and people get comfortable with the medium. But there's so much potential. So I'm really appreciative also what KikoChat is enabling us to do. So thank you, Lucas.
Of course, you're welcome. And you're really thanking a community of people that just keep suggesting more improvements. So that's why we do this, so we can learn from each other. Karen, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that covers it.
A wonderful presentation, Karen and François, for bringing your passion, your energy, opening up the book, taking us page by page. Found it, and I like how you blended different media in this. So I will be offering suggestions for the next folks that do these facilitation interviews. Take a look at this one to see how you teamed up and made it very interactive. So thank you very much for being here today, and to all the participants, and we look forward to seeing what everybody does online. I'll stop the recording here and then folks can chat for a bit, but thanks again for being here today and wish you all a great week.
Thank you.